On the longest night of the year, when the moor country wolves gather at the high hall to watch their king choose, one house sends 2 daughters to be seen. The elder wears moon-silver silk and a borrowed name and a claim that was never hers. The younger is sent to carry the trains and mind the cloaks, sent in gray, sent without so much as a pair of slippers, because a girl who has nothing cannot be chosen, and a girl who cannot be chosen is safer kept invisible. But the king does not look at the silk. He has looked all year at the gray. And when the music falls and the floor clears, and every lord in the hall expects him to take the hand in the famous gown, the Alpha King does not move toward the silk. He steps down only as far as the dais rail, and he looks past the whole glittering court to the very back of the hall, where a servant with bare feet and ash in her hair stands holding other people's cloaks. He holds out his hand across the length of the floor. "Not the silk," he says. "Her. Come here." The hall goes silent. The gown goes white. And every eye turns, not to the king, but to the gray girl at the back who must now choose whether to cross a room she has spent her whole life learning to disappear in. The question is not why he asked. The question is what the woman in the silk has hidden, and how long the barefoot one has until the lie wearing her late mother's gown swallows them both. Chapter 1. The bell over the scullery door rang twice before dawn, and Linda was already awake to answer it. She was always awake before it. That was the trick of surviving in the house at Crowmoor, the trick her own mother had never had time to teach her, and that she had taught herself. Be there before they have to call you. A girl who answers before the second ring is a girl no one bothers to look at, and Linda had learned that being unlooked at was the closest thing to safety the house allowed. She came up the cold stone stair with her hands already full, the night water and the kindling and the small heel of bread she had saved from her own portion the evening before, because Tace would not have eaten, and Tace was 9 and growing, and the kitchen accounts did not stretch to growing girls who were only kept on as charity. The hall above was still dark. Frost had laced the inside of the high windows in feathers, and through them the moor lay gray and endless, the heather flattened under old snow, the standing stones at the boundary just visible as a row of black teeth against the paling sky. Beyond the stones, far off, the smoke of the high hall rose in a thin, straight line. The king's hall. She did not let herself look at it long. "You're up," said Marrow. He was sitting on the low stool by the kennel door where he always sat, an old man wrapped in 3 coats, his hands busy with a length of leather he was plaiting for no reason except that his hands had never learned to be still. The hounds lay around his feet in a gray heap, and one of them, the old lame brindle hound he loved best, thumped her tail against the stone when she saw Linda without lifting her head. "I'm always up," Linda said. "You're always up." He said it the way he said most things, as though he were agreeing with the weather. "There's a thing happening, did you know? There's always a thing happening. Not like this thing." Marrow tied off the leather and looked at her, and his eyes, which were milky at the edges now but had not stopped being sharp in the middle, went over her face the way they went over a hound he suspected of going lame. The Luna Ball. Solstice. The king chooses. Linda set down the water. She kept her back to him while she did it, because her face was doing something she did not want him to see, and a girl who has learned to be unlooked at has also learned to be careful which back she turns. "He chooses every year," she said. "It has nothing to do with this house." "Doesn't it?" Marrow went back to his leather. "Your stepmother's been 3 days at the chest in the long room. The locked one. The one nobody's touched since her mother died." He did not say it. He never said it. But the unsaid thing hung in the cold air between them the way her breath did, and Linda found she had stopped moving entirely, one hand still flat against the cold rim of the water bucket. The locked chest held her mother's things. Her mother's books, her mother's small, worthless treasures, and folded in linen at the very bottom, the gown. Linda had seen it exactly once when she was small enough to be lifted, and she remembered it the way you remember a thing from a dream you were not supposed to have. A fall of silk, the color of the moon on water, so pale it seemed to make its own light, with a thread of silver run all through it like the path the moon lays on a still lake. Her mother had worn it the night the old king named her kin. Her mother had worn it the night she was made Luna of this house, before the marriage that ended it, before the second wife, before everything went gray. "She has no right to that chest," Linda said. Her voice came out lower than she meant it. "No," Marrow agreed. "She doesn't, but right's a thing for people with someone to enforce it. You've nobody, so." He shrugged, the leather creaking. "Mind yourself tonight, girl. When a thing like that gown comes out of a locked chest, somebody's about to be made into a story. Make sure it isn't you." Linda did not understand him then. She would understand him later, when it was almost too late. She carried the night water back down to the scullery, and Tace was awake after all, curled in the warm corner by the banked fire with her knees to her chest, watching the door the way a small creature watches a door, ready to be sent away from it. "You should be asleep," Linda said. "I heard the bell." Tace was 9, all elbows and watchfulness, kept on at Crowmoor the way Linda was kept on, as a kindness no one in the house actually felt. "Is it her? Is she awake?" "She said if I broke another cup she'd send me to the wool house. She's awake, but not for you. Here." Linda broke the saved heel of bread and gave Tace the larger half, the way she always did, and watched the child eat it too fast, and felt the old useless ache of it, that there was never enough, that all she could do was have what little there was and hand the bigger piece to whoever was smaller. "Eat slower, nobody's going to take it. You always say that. And it's always true," Tace chewed, watching her. "There's a ball tonight," she said, around the bread. "At the King's Hall. Marrow told me. The king chooses a Luna. Do you think it's true he can tell, just by looking, which one's lying?" "I don't think anyone can tell anything just by looking," Linda said. "That's the whole trouble with the world. People decide what they see and then they stop looking." She tucked the thin blanket up around the child's shoulders. "Sleep. If she asks, you've been asleep the whole night and you never heard a thing." But the question stayed with her as she went back up the cold stair, the way splinters stay. "Do you think he can tell which one's lying?" Linda had spent her whole life among people who had decided what they saw when they looked at her. A servant, a nobody, a gray thing at the edge of the warmth, and had stopped looking the moment they decided. She did not believe in a man who could see past that. She had never met one. She did not expect to. The bell over the scullery door rang again, 3 times now, which meant her stepmother and Linda went to answer it before the 4th. Chapter 2. Hesper Dunlow was beautiful in the way the moor in winter was beautiful, which is to say from a distance, and provided you did not have to live in it. She stood at the long room window in oxblood brocade with the light behind her, and she did not turn when Linda came in. On the table before her, laid out on a sheet of clean linen as though it were a body prepared for burial, was the gown. Linda's breath went out of her. It was worse, or better, than memory. The silk drank the gray morning light and gave it back silver. The moon thread caught and ran and caught again. It was the single most beautiful thing in the house, the single most beautiful thing Linda had ever seen, and it had been her mother's, and her stepmother was standing over it with her arms folded as though deciding where to make the first cut. "There you are," Hesper said. "Sabella wears this tonight." The words took a moment to land. When they did, Linda felt them in her chest, low, like a stone dropped down a well. That was my mother's. Your mother is dead. Hesper said it without heat, which was somehow worse than if she had said it cruelly. She turned at last, and her eyes went over Linda the way they always did, a quick accounting, an inventory of a thing she was obliged to keep and did not value. And the gown is the gown of the Luna of this house. There is no Luna of this house at present. Sabella will be presented tonight as kin to the old line through your mother's blood, which she carries by marriage, and the king will see what a fine match the house of Crowmoor can still make. The gown supports the claim. Do you understand the word claim, Linda? Or shall I use a smaller one? Sabella isn't kin to my mother's blood. She's your daughter. She's no relation to mine at all. She is my daughter, and I was your father's wife. And your father is also dead. And the dead do not contradict the living. Hesper smiled, and it did not touch the rest of her face. Tonight, the gown says what I need it to say. A Luna's gown on a Luna's heir. Nobody at that hall has seen your mother in 20 years. Nobody will look past the silk to ask whose shoulders it was cut for. It was so brazen that for a moment Linda could not speak. The plan was laid out in front of her as plainly as the gown, and it was monstrous in its simplicity. Dress the false heir in the true heir's robe. Let the silk do the lying. Walk a stranger into the king's hall wearing the moon and call her kin. And me, Linda said. You will come. Hesper turned back to the window. You'll carry the trains, mind the cloaks, and keep to the back. You'll go in gray, and you'll go in plain, and you will say nothing to anyone of rank, because a girl in gray who says nothing is a girl no one remembers, and I should very much like for no one to remember that this house has 2 daughters in it tonight. Do you understand me? Yes, Linda said, and shoes. Hesper's mouth tightened. You've worn through the last pair, and I'll not spend on another for a servant to ruin in the snow. You'll go as you are. It's only the back of the hall. No one looks at the feet of the people at the back. No one looks at the feet of the people at the back. Linda held the sentence very still inside herself, the way you hold a coal you have not yet decided to drop. She thought of her mother in this gown. She thought of being told to carry its trains on another woman's body through the door of the king's own hall. She thought, I will get through tonight the way I get through every night, by being too small to see. Yes, she said again, but something in her had begun, very quietly, to refuse. It was Linda, in the end, who dressed Sabella in the gown, because there was no one else with hands gentle enough, and because Hesper would trust no other servant near the silk. They did it in the long room with the door shut, in the failing afternoon light, and Linda lifted her mother's gown off the linen and felt the weight of it settle over her own arms like cold water, and for one moment she let herself imagine, just once, what it would be to put it on herself. She did not. She put it on Sabella, and that was when she saw it. The gown did not fit, did not. Sabella was broader through the back and the shoulders than the woman it had been cut for, and the silk strained and gaped at the left shoulder seam, and Hesper made a sound of impatience and sent for a needle and thread. And there in the long room the seam was opened and let out by a maid who did not know her work, in a hurry, with a thread that did not match. Linda watched it happen. The new stitching sat lighter against the old, because the silver thread that had matched the gown 20 years ago could not be got any more, and the maid used what there was, and the difference was small. But it was there, a paler seam running up the left shoulder of the moon-silver silk like a scar. Stop staring, Hesper said. Make yourself useful or get out. Linda turned the hem in her hands to check it lay straight, the way a careful servant would, and her fingers found the place near the inside edge where her mother's name was worked in the same moon thread as the gown, 5 small letters, Brisa, So fine you would never see them unless you turned the hem and looked, which a thief in a hurry to dress a lie would never think to do. She let the hem fall. She said nothing. She did not yet know why she was keeping it, only that it was hers to keep. The one true thing in a room full of lies, and a girl who has learned to be unlooked at has also learned which truths to fold up small and carry where no one will think to search. "Yes," she said, when Hesper told her again to keep to the back. "I understand." But the seam and the name stayed with her all the way to the hall. Chapter 3. They crossed the moor at dusk in a hired cart, Hesper and Sibella under fur rugs in the seat and Linda on the board behind with the cloaks and the cold, and the snow came down fine and steady out of a sky the color of a bruise. The standing stones went by black against the last of the light. Linda watched the smoke of the high hall grow from a thin line into a glow, into a great blaze of windows, and she pulled her thin shawl tighter and tucked her bare feet up under her gray shift, and thought about how strange it was that she should be carried toward the most important night of her life like a piece of the luggage, which was, she supposed, exactly what she was meant to be. "Remember," Hesper said once, without turning around, "you are not here. Do you understand me? Whatever happens in that hall, you are not in it. You are a pair of hands at the back and nothing else." A pause. "It will go easier for you the less you exist tonight." Linda did not answer. The snow came down. The hall blazed nearer. And under the bruised sky, some small, stubborn thing in her, the thing that had begun very quietly to refused a little more. The high hall on the night of the Luna Ball was a thing out of a story, and Linda, who had spent her whole life being told she did not belong inside stories, stood at the very back of it with her bare feet on the cold marble, and let it hurt her a little to look. Every sconce was lit. The light came down gold and trembling from 100 candles, and threw the whole assembled court into warmth, the lords in their dark wool and fur, the ladies in jewel colors, the long tables dressed with winter greenery and the first oranges Linda had ever seen, brought from somewhere south at a cost she could not imagine. Above it all, the great windows stood open to the night despite the cold, because tonight the moon was the guest of honor, and the moor wolves did not shut the moon out on the night their king chose. And at the front of the hall, on the dais, stood the king. She had not expected him to be young. The stories made the Alpha King ancient and terrible, a figure of fur and iron, and Gideon Ashdale was none of those things. He was tall and dark and still, in a deep green coat with a black harness across it, and a half-mantle of gray fur at one shoulder, and at his throat a wolf worked in bronze, and a silver cuff at one wrist that caught the candlelight when he moved, which was rarely. He had the kind of stillness Linda recognized, because she had taught it to herself, the stillness of someone who has learned that being watched is a danger, and has decided to give the watchers nothing. He was watching the hall. He was watching the doors, and when the steward struck the floor with his staff and called the house of Crowmoor, and Sibella came through the doors in the moon-silver gown, with Hesper at her shoulder, and Linda 3 steps behind with her arms full of cloaks, Linda saw the king's gaze go to the gown, saw it stop, saw something cross his face, quick and gone, that she could not read, and would spend the rest of the night trying to. Sibella was lovely. Linda had never denied it. Her half-sister had their stepmother's beauty without the frost, a soft prettiness that the moon-silver silk turned into something almost unearthly. And as she crossed the floor with her chin up and her hand light on Hesper's arm, a murmur went through the hall, and the murmur was admiration, and it was exactly what Hesper had paid for. "That's the Crowmoor gown," Linda heard a lord say nearby. "The old Luna's gown. I'd not seen it in 20 years. So the line carries on after all." "A fine match," said the woman beside him. If the king has sense. Linda stood at the back with the cloaks and watched her mother's gown tell a lie to a room full of people who wanted to believe it, and she had never in her life felt so completely, so deliberately unseen. She let herself look at the hall instead, because looking was the one thing no one could stop her doing. She watched a lord drink too fast, and a lady watch him do it with a face like a closed door. She watched the steward count the candles with his eyes the way she counted the bread. She watched two old women by the fire, who were clearly sisters, lean their heads together and laugh at something private, and felt the old ache of it, the warmth that other people seemed to be handed, and she had only ever held other people's cloaks at the edge of. She watched the king. He had not moved from the dais. He stood with his stillness around him like a coat, and the lords came to him one by one to say their flattering things, and he gave each of them a measured word, and his eyes went back, every time, to the hall, to the doors, to the back of the hall. Twice Linda thought his gaze passed over the place where she stood, and twice she told herself she was imagining it, because that was the safer thing to believe, and she had built her whole life out of believing the safer thing. She did not see the king step down to the rail. She was looking at her own bare feet on the marble, counting the cold, doing the thing she did to make herself small, and so the first she knew of it was the hall going quiet around her, a hush spreading out from the center like a ring on water, and she looked up to find the whole court turned and staring, and the music stopped, and Sibella standing alone in the moon-silver gown with her hand still half lifted for a dance that was not going to come. Because the king had not gone to the gown. He stood at the edge of the dais, one foot down on the floor, and he was not looking at the silk. He was looking the whole length of the bright hall to the very back of it, to the gray girl with her arms full of other people's cloaks and ash in her hair, and nothing at all on her feet. And every head in the court had turned to follow his gaze, and so the whole hall was looking at her now, all of it at once, the thing she had spent her entire life arranging, never to happen. He held out his hand across the floor. "Not the silk," he said, and his voice carried into the silence as though the hall had been built to hold it. "Her. The one at the back." A pause. "Come here." Chapter 4. Afterward, Linda could never put the next moments in order. They came back to her out of sequence for years, like cards from a dropped deck. The cloaks. She had been holding the cloaks, and then she was not, and she never knew who took them, only that her arms were suddenly empty and the cold rushed in. The floor. The long, bright stretch of it between her and the dais, cleared of dancers now, every face along its edges turned toward her, and at the far end the king with his hand held out and his storm-gray eyes fixed on her and no one else. The understanding, slow and terrible, that he was not going to come and fetch her, that he had left the floor empty on purpose, that a king could have crossed a room in 3 strides and chosen instead to stand still and let her decide, in front of everyone, whether she would walk it herself. "My lord," Linda said, and her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect, and it carried because the hall was that silent. "I think you've made a mistake. The lady you want is there, in the gown. I know exactly where the gown is." He did not lower the hand. His eyes were the color of the storm sky over the moor in the hour before snow, and they were fixed on her with an attention so complete that Linda felt it as a pressure, a warmth, a thing she had no defense against because she had built all her defenses against being ignored and none at all against being seen. "I didn't ask the gown to come. I asked you. I'm the help. I know what you are." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. "You're the one who answers the gate before the second ring. You're the one who carries bread down to the kennel yard in the dark so the old man and the small girl eat. You're the one who's been at the back of every gathering this valley has held for a year, where I could see you and you never once saw me." He kept the hand out, steady, across all that bright, cold distance. "I have been watching you from the back of my own life for a year, Linda Crowmoor, because I told myself it was safer for you that way. Tonight, I'm done being safe. I'll not drag you out into this hall. I'll not choose it for you the way everyone has always chosen everything for you. But I am going to stand here with my hand out until you decide. So, decide. Walk to me or don't. It's yours." The hall was utterly silent. Linda looked at the long, bright floor and at the hand at the end of it, and she understood what he was really asking, which was not for a dance. He was asking her to be seen, to cross, of her own feet, the whole length of a room she had spent 20 years learning to vanish in, with every eye in the valley on her, and to claim the thing he was holding out instead of waiting at the back to be told where to stand. She thought of every reason not to. They were all good reasons. They all came down to the same thing, that being seen had never once in her life been safe. She set down the last cloak, and she walked, bare feet on cold marble, the long, bright floor unrolling under her, the staring faces sliding past at the edges of her sight, her own heart so loud she was sure the hall could hear it, and she did not look at any of them. She looked only at the hand and the storm-gray eyes above it, and she walked the whole length of the king's hall to reach them, and put her bare, cold hand in his warm, scarred one. And the moon came out from behind the cloud through the open windows and fell across the marble in a long silver road, and the king of the moor-wolves closed his fingers around the hand of a barefoot servant who had crossed his entire hall to claim it, and drew her into the dance, while a court that had come to watch him choose silk watched the gray girl choose herself. Chapter 5. He danced the way he stood, with a stillness at the center of all his motion, and he held her as though she were not made of glass, which she had half expected, and not made of nothing, which she had wholly expected, but made of something he had decided was worth the care of his hands. "You're trembling," he said, low, for her only. "It's cold. I haven't any shoes." "That's not why you're trembling." It wasn't. She did not tell him so. The whole hall was a blur at the edges of her, candle gold and staring, and at the center of it there was only the cold marble under her bare feet and the warm, steady press of his hand at her back. She had spent 20 years learning to be a thing that slid out of people's attention, and she had no idea what to do now that she was the whole of someone's. She kept waiting for him to remember himself, to see what he was actually holding. A gray servant with ash in her hair, and to set her down with the polite distaste she had braced for her whole life. He did not. He kept looking at her as though she were the answer to a question he had carried a long way, and it frightened her more than scorn would have, because scorn she knew how to survive. "Why?" she said instead. "And don't tell me again that you've watched me for a year, because that's not an answer. That's a reason to have me thrown out, not to dance with me in front of everyone you rule." "It's the only answer I have." His hand was warm at her back, steady, turning her through the slow figure of the dance while the whole hall pretended not to stare, and stared. "A year ago, I rode through Crowmoor at dusk. There'd been a fire in the low cottages, and I came to see it put right. Everyone was running and shouting and saving what could be saved, and in the middle of it there was a girl carrying water to an old man who'd breathed the smoke, and she wasn't running and she wasn't shouting. She just kept doing the next needed thing, and the next, while the people of rank stood about being important. Nobody thanked her. Nobody saw her. She went back into the dark when it was done as though she'd never been there." His eyes held hers. I have run a hall full of people who perform for me, Linda. Do you understand how rare it is to see someone who does the right thing when she believes no one is looking? I have not been able to stop looking since. Linda's throat had closed. She had to look away from him, at the moonlit floor, at her own bare feet keeping the time of the dance. That's a story, she said. That's a thing you've made pretty. I'm the help. My stepmother is going to make you a very good match tonight with my mother's gown on a girl who isn't kin to my mother at all, and you should let her, because it's clean and it's simple, and I am neither of those things. The king went very still in the middle of the turn. Say that again, he said, the part about the gown. And Linda, who had spent her whole life learning when to keep silent, looked up into the storm-gray eyes of the man who had made her walk the length of his own hall to be found, and made the choice that would unmake everything. The gown is my mother's, she said. She was the true Luna of Crowmoor before she died. My stepmother took it from a locked chest this morning and put it on her own daughter to make a claim of kinship that is a lie. Sabella is no blood of the old line. The gown is the only proof anyone will accept, and it's proof of nothing except that my stepmother knows how to dress a lie in silver. For a long moment the king said nothing. Then softly he said, Do you know what you've just done? Told you the truth. Told me a truth I can act on. His hand tightened, not painfully, but with a kind of urgency that frightened her more than anger would have. Linda, listen to me carefully and keep dancing while I say it, because the whole hall is watching and we cannot stop. A false claim of Luna kinship, made in this hall, on this night, is not a small lie. It carries the old penalty. If your stepmother is presenting your sister as kin of the moonline and she is not, then your stepmother has not made a fine match. She has committed a thing that ends in exile, or worse, for everyone who carried it knowingly through that door. His eyes searched her face. Everyone who carried it. Do you understand? You carried the trains. The floor seemed to drop away beneath Linda's bare feet. She understood. She understood all at once and completely, the way you understand a step missed in the dark. Hesper had not sent her to the back of the hall to keep her invisible. Hesper had sent her in gray, carrying the false heir's trains, so that when the lie was discovered, as lies in the king's hall were always eventually discovered, there would be a second Crowmoor daughter standing in the wreckage with the evidence in her own 2 hands. A servant, a nobody. Someone to hang the whole thing on when the reckoning came. Make sure it isn't you, Marrow had said. When a thing like that gown comes out of a locked chest, somebody's about to be made into a story. The story was going to be her. Chapter 6. They stopped dancing. The music had ended and Linda had not noticed, and the king stepped back from her one careful pace, and the loss of his warmth was like a window thrown open in winter. Around them the hall began slowly, to remember how to move and murmur, and across the floor Linda could see Hesper coming, ox blood and ice, her face arranged into a mother's fond pride, and her eyes promising murder. Go to the gate yard, the king said, very low, not moving his lips. The east door, behind the arras. There's a yard with a moon gate. Wait for me there. Do not speak to your stepmother. Do not let her get you alone. Go now, while they're still looking at me. Why are you helping me? You don't know me. I have known you for a year. He stepped back another pace and pitched his voice up suddenly into something cool and public and kingly, a performance pulled on like a coat. Thank you for the dance, he said, loud enough to carry, with a small, formal bow, as though she were a curiosity he had indulged and was now finished with. The hall will remember it. And then, under it, almost without moving his mouth, fierce and fast, go. Now. Trust me 1 hour." And he turned from her, deliberately, dismissively, giving the whole watching hall the story they expected. The king's strange whim concluded, the servant put back in her place, and the relief that went through the room was almost a sound. It gave Linda her chance. In the moment everyone's attention released her, she slipped backward through the crowd, the way she had slipped through crowds her whole life, small and gray and unremarkable, and she found the east door behind the heiress and went through it into the cold. The gate yard was empty and silver. A small stone court, walled with a wrought iron gate at the far end, worked in the shape of a wolf's head, and beyond the gate the moor falling away black and endless under the full moon. The snow had been swept to the edges. Linda stood in the middle of the swept stone in her bare feet, and her gray shifted and shook, and not from the cold, and tried to understand what had happened to her life in the space of one dance. She did not hear him come. She only knew he was there when his half-mantle came down around her shoulders, the gray fur still warm from his body, and she turned, and the king was there, close, his hand still at the edge of the mantle where he had settled it on her. "You'll freeze," he said. "You should be inside. They'll wonder where you've gone." "Let them wonder." He did not step back. The moon was very bright. This close she could see that the stillness she had taken for coldness was something else entirely, a thing held down hard, a thing that cost him. "I've spent a year being careful," he said, "watching from the back of the hall, telling myself a king does not call a servant girl out of a crowd, that it would expose you, that it would put you in exactly the danger I'm now standing in a yard trying to pull you out of. I was right about all of it. And tonight I held out my hand anyway, because I watched your stepmother walk you through my door carrying the rope she means to hang you with, and I found I could not stand at the back 1 more hour and let her." His hand came up, slow, and tucked a loose strand of dark copper hair back from her face, and his fingers were warm against her cold cheek. "I'm not careful anymore, Linda. I've found I don't want to be." "This is mad," she whispered. "You're the king. I'm the girl who answers the gate. You keep saying that as though it settles something." There was almost a smile in it, tired and real. "As though if you say what you are often enough, I'll come to my senses and agree with you. I won't. I know better than anyone in that hall what a person is worth, because I've spent my whole life watching people be worth less the higher they climb. You've climbed nothing. You've been handed nothing. And you're the only one in there who told me a true thing tonight when a lie would have served you better." He shook his head slowly. "Do you have any idea what that's worth to a man who's lied to for a living, by everyone who wants something from him? You stood in my hall with nothing, with everything to lose. And you told me a truth that puts a noose round your own neck rather than let me walk into a lie. Linda." His voice had dropped to almost nothing. "I am not going to let her make you into the story. I'd hold my hand out across that hall 100 times first." And he kissed her. It was not careful. It was a year of careful breaking all at once, his hand warm at the back of her neck and the fur mantle around them both, and the moon laying its silver road across the swept stone, and Linda, who had spent her whole life being too small to be seen, was for one suspended moment seen so completely that it undid her, and she kissed him back, and the cold went somewhere very far away. When they broke apart, his forehead came down to rest against hers, and they stood breathing each other's breath in the white air. 1 hour, he murmured. "Give me 1 hour and I'll have the proof I need to break her claim instead of you. Stay here. Stay out of her reach. I'm going back into—" The gate yard door opened. "Well," said Hesper Dunlow, from the dark of the arras, with the king's own guards behind her and a smile like a blade. "Isn't this a tender thing? Your Majesty, I'm afraid I must trouble you. This girl is a thief, and I've come to take her home. Chapter 7. It happened fast, the way bad things do, faster than truth can move. She's no thief, the king said, and stepped between Linda and the gate-yard door, and the easy public coolness was gone, and what was under it was so plainly furious that the guards behind Hesper checked. She's wearing your fur, my lord, and she's a scullion of my house, and an hour ago she was at the back of your hall where she belongs. Hesper had not stopped smiling. She had the situation in her hands now. Linda could see it. She had walked into the yard and found exactly the weapon she needed lying ready. The whole hall saw you dance with her on a whim. A king's strange fancy. Charming. And now they'll see her taken away in disgrace for the small theft she committed while you were distracted, which is the natural and unremarkable end of such a fancy. And by morning it'll be a funny story and nothing more. Her eyes flicked to Linda, cold and triumphant. I told you to keep to the back. I told you no one looks at the feet of the people at the back. You couldn't even do that. You had to be seen. What is she meant to have stolen? The king said. The Luna's gown is the property of my house. This girl has been telling lies all night that it was her late mother's, trying to discredit my daughter's claim out of jealousy, a servant's spite. She'll say anything. You see how she's wormed her way to you, my lord. You see what she is. Hesper's voice was honey over iron. Give her back to me. Let me deal with my own household's shame quietly, and we'll none of us speak of it again, and your hall keeps its dignity, and the matter of my daughter's presentation proceeds as it should. That's the clean ending, your majesty. The simple one. She tilted her head. You strike me as a man who prefers things clean. And Linda watched the trap close, perfect and seamless, because it was true. It was the clean ending. The king could let her be taken, let her become the small, funny story of the servant who reached too high, and his hall would keep its dignity, and the lie would stand, and the reckoning, when it came, would come down only on a gray girl no one would miss. Every reason said, let her go. Linda knew it. She had spent her whole life on the side of the reasons that said let her go. But she thought, in the space of one held breath, of all the years she had folded herself small. Every gathering she had watched from the back of. Every truth she had swallowed because speaking it was not safe. She thought of Tace eating bread too fast in a cold corner, learning already the same lesson Linda had learned, to be too little to see. She thought of her mother's name worked into a hem where no one would ever look, a true thing hidden because the world had no use for it. And she thought, with a clarity that felt like cold water, she has built this entire trap on the certainty that I will stay quiet. The whole thing only works if I am the girl I have always been. The king looked at her, and Linda understood that he was not going to take the clean ending, and that this was the moment, the only moment, and that if she stood at the back of her own life one more time, she would deserve everything that came. I'm not a thief, Linda said. Her voice rang off the swept stone, clear, louder than she had ever let it be. Hesper's smile flickered. The gown is my mother's, Linda said. Brisa Crowmoor, the true Luna of this house, and I can prove it, which is the one thing you never planned for, because you've spent so long treating me as furniture that you forgot furniture has eyes. She turned to the king and to the guards, and she pitched her voice to carry through the open door into the hall beyond, where she could already hear the music falter as people drifted toward the sound. The gown is cut for my mother's shoulders, not Sabella's. It's been let out at the seams tonight, badly, in the last 3 days, because Sabella is broader through the back than my mother was, and the new stitching is a different thread, lighter, because the silver thread that matched ran out 20 years ago and can't be got. Look at the left shoulder seam. Look at where it's been opened and closed in haste. A gown that belonged to the wearer's own line wouldn't need letting out by a hand that doesn't know how. It needs letting out because it was made for someone else. For my mother, whose name is worked into the hem in moon thread, on the inside, where a thief in a hurry would never think to look. Brisa. 5 letters. It's there. Send for the gown and turn back the hem and read it. The yard had filled. Lords and ladies crowding the door now, drawn by the rising voice, and behind them, pale in moon silver, Sabella, one hand pressed to her left shoulder seam where the hasty stitching was, her face the face of someone who has just understood she is wearing the evidence against herself. "That's a lie," Hesper said, but the honey had cracked. "That's a servant's spite. She'll say anything." "Then send for the gown," the king said, "and turn back the hem, and we'll all read it together. Here, now, in front of witnesses." He had not raised his voice. He did not need to. "If the name worked into that hem is Brisa Crowmoor, then this woman has not stolen the gown. This woman is the daughter of the gown. And you, madam, have walked a false claim of moonline kinship through my door on the night of the choosing, which you know as well as I do is the one lie this hall does not forgive." He let that sit. "Shall we read the hem, Lady Dunlow, or shall we save the candle, and you tell these good people yourself whose name is in it?" Silence. And in the silence, Sabella, who was 19 and frightened and had spent her whole life doing what her mother told her, said in a small voice, "It's Brisa, the name in the hem. I saw it when she dressed me. Mother said never to turn the hem, and I did, once, when she'd left the room." She stopped. Her hand was still at the broken seam. "I didn't want to wear it. I told her I didn't want to wear a gown that was someone else's. Someone gone, to be made into something I'm not." "I'm sorry," she said, and she was looking at Linda now, not at her mother. "I'm sorry. You used to give me your bread. When I was small and Mother sent you down to the kennels, you used to give me half your bread, and I never said a kind word back to you, not once." Her voice broke. "It's Brisa. It was never ours." Chapter 8. It ended quietly in the end, which Linda had not expected. She had expected the reckoning the king had warned her of, the exile or the worse than exile, and perhaps in an older or a harder hall it would have come. But Gideon Ashdale was not, she was learning, a man who reached for the heaviest stone when a lighter one would do. Hesper Dunlow was not dragged from the hall. She was permitted to leave it, which in the Moor country was its own kind of sentence. The claim broken in front of every house of rank, her name passed hand to hand by morning across the whole valley, the doors that had opened to a mother of a moonline heir closing one by one against a woman who had tried to forge one. She walked out of the gate yard with her chin up and her face a mask, and she did not look at Linda, and Linda found, watching her go, that she felt no triumph at all, only a kind of tiredness, and under it, surprising her, a thread of something almost like grief, for the warmth that house had never once held, for all the years of gray. Sabella did not go with her mother. Sabella stood in the moon-silver gown that was not hers, and wept, and it was Linda, in the end, who went to her, because someone had to, and there was no one else, and that was the shape of Linda's whole life in one gesture, doing the next needed thing while the people of rank stood about. "Take it off," Linda said gently. "It was never going to fit you. It doesn't fit me either. It was hers. Let's put it away." "What will I do?" Sabella whispered. "Mother's ruined. The house is ruined. I've nothing and nowhere, and I helped her do it. I knew it was a lie, and I wore it anyway. You told the truth at the end, when it cost you everything to tell it." Linda took her stepsister's cold hands. "That's worth more than you think. I'd know. She got Sabella out of the gown there in a side room with a maid's help, and folded the moon-silver silk back into its linen the way you fold something that is finished being a weapon, and she found that her own hands were steady now, steadier than they had been all night. The thing that had begun very quietly to refuse, that morning over the gown, had finished. There was nothing left in her that wanted to be small. Marrow had come up to the hall with the carts, the way the old kennel-man always did, to mind the hounds the visiting lords brought, and he was waiting in the cold of the gate-yard when Linda came out, wrapped in his 3 coats, the firelight from the hall catching the milky edges of his sharp old eyes. "Heard there was a commotion," he said. "Heard a gray girl stood up in the king's own yard and named a liar to her face." He looked her over the way he looked over a hound that had surprised him by being braver than its breeding. "That doesn't sound like the girl who's too small to see." "She isn't here anymore," Linda said. "No." Marrow nodded slowly. "I don't suppose she is." And he smiled and went to see to the hounds, because some things old men say best by walking away from them. And over Sabella's bent head she met the eyes of the king, who was watching her from across the swept stone with the moon behind him, and the look on his face was not the look of a man who had indulged a whim. It was the look of a man who had been right about something for a year, and had just had it proved in front of his whole court, and this time it was he who came to her. He stepped down off the dais and walked the length of the swept stone himself, openly, in front of the whole hall, the thing he had refused to do at the ball when he made her choose to walk it instead, and Linda understood the difference and did not flinch from being seen. "Linda Crowmoor," he said, "daughter of the true Luna of this house. There is a hem with your mother's name in it, which makes the gown yours, which makes you what you are by blood and not by anyone's leave but the truth's." He took her bare, cold hand in his warm, scarred one, the way he had at the start of the dance, but slower now and deliberate and in front of everyone. "I held my hand out across this hall tonight and made you walk to me, because I have wanted, for a year, to stop being careful with you, and I would not be the one more person who decided where you would stand. I find I want to spend a great deal more of my life being uncareful in exactly this direction. But I'll not do to you what she did. I'll not make you into a story you didn't choose." His thumb moved once across her knuckles. "So I'm asking, and you can say no, and the whole hall can hear you say it. Stay. Not as the help, not at the back. Here, with me. Choose it or don't, but choose it for yourself. You've spent your whole life being told where to stand. Tonight you tell me." Linda looked at the hand. She thought of every reason to say no, and they were all good reasons, and they all came down to the same old thing, that being seen had never once been safe. But it was safe now. He had made it safe. He had held out his hand and broken the trap and stood between her and the dark, and he was asking her to choose, which no one in her whole life had ever done. "Yes," she said. And this time, the word was not a servant's yes, not the small, flat yes she had said to Hesper across the gown that morning. This time it was hers, chosen, spoken loud enough for the whole hall to hear, the first thing she had ever claimed in her life. The moon came through the open windows and laid its silver road across the stone, and the Alpha King drew the Barefoot one into the warmth of his arms, and somewhere behind them the music started again. Epilogue. A year later, on the longest night, the house at Crowmoor held a fire in the low cottages, a good one, lit on purpose in the swept yard, and the whole valley came. It was the kind of gathering Linda had once watched from the back of, holding other people's cloaks. She stood at the center of this one now, in a gown of deep moor green that had been made for her shoulders and no one else's. And she did not hold anyone's cloaks. And when the children of the low cottages ran shrieking around the fire, she let them, and pressed warm bread into the hands of the ones who looked hungry, because some habits are not worth breaking. Marrow sat by the kennel door where he always sat, the old lame brindlehound asleep against his leg, and he watched Linda move through the firelight, and he smiled the smile of a man who has been right about a girl since she was small enough to lift. "Told you," he said, when she came to sit by him a while. "Somebody was going to be made into a story that night. You told me to make sure it wasn't me. And you didn't listen. And look." He nodded at the fire, at the king standing easy among the cottage folk with his fur mantle thrown over a child who'd got cold, talking to a farmer as though they were equals, which in the firelight they were. "You went and made yourself into a better one." Sabella was there too, by the bread table, no longer in anyone's borrowed silk, working as hard as anyone, and laughing more than Linda had ever heard her laugh in the gray years. She had stayed. Hesper had gone south and was not spoken of, and Sabella had stayed and earned, slowly, a place that was actually hers. And that, Linda thought, was its own kind of moon thread, a true name worked quietly into a hem where no one had thought to look. The king came to find her at the edge of the firelight, the way he always did now, and he stood beside her and looked out at the moor going silver under the rising moon. "Cold?" he said. "A little." He settled the gray fur mantle around her shoulders, still warm from his body, the way he had in the gate yard a year ago. And then he looked down at her bare feet, planted in the swept yard, because she had kicked off her slippers somewhere near the fire and not bothered to find them, and the corner of his mouth moved. "Barefoot again," he said. "It's how you found me," Linda said. "I thought I'd keep it, so you don't forget which one I am." "I made you walk a whole hall to me, and you came," he said. "I'm not likely to forget which one you are." He took her cold hand in his warm, scarred one, and the moon laid its silver road across the swept stone, the way it had the night he held out his hand and she chose to cross to it, gray over silver, truth over the clean and simple lie. "You're the one who walked." And under the longest moon of the year, at the center of the firelight where she had spent her whole life being told she did not belong, the barefoot one danced with her king. And this time, no one in the whole valley was surprised.